This is a conversation I'm having now together with Tim Grosser, Head of Digital Transformation of Iata, and my personal Prince of Wales, Alun Rhydderch, because he is from Wales. So, 2 microphones for 2 guests, and one short question. Will the industry still exist in 20 years? And what do we have to do in order to come here again and to have Deutsche Bahn booking flights, you know, for us? That was good.
Well, I think, thank you, firstly. But firstly, that's taking us right to the answer, isn't it, the whole quiz. And for sure it will exist, but I think everything will be changing as we go. Everything will be transformed. And maybe sort of to set the scene, really, of where we see the industry at the moment, and this is lending from the IATA's economic data, that we see that the industry is going to double in the next 20 years from 3.8 billion passengers to 7.2. And the flex on that, depending on whether it's a good case or a bad case scenario, is between basically 5 and 11 billion growth. So what we see, though, is a significant growth over the next 20 years. On top of that, 2/3 of that growth will come from the Asia-Pac region. So that really has an interesting impact on where we see the industry going. In addition, currently at the moment, we're running at relatively high capacity, so it's something like 82, 83% utilisation, and we have a very high ROIC, or return on invested capital, which is at the moment significantly above average over the time. So, you know, we're running at full capacity, making good money as a whole, as an industry, and see significant growth. So that really sets the scene of where we can go going forward.
So we can sit down and relax?
No. I think no.
What a shame.
Sure.
Because when I heard there's enough money and people, I was happy.
Yeah, exactly.
No, so what do we have to do? You have done a study.
Yeah, so the reason why we did this study, which I'll ask Alan to talk to about how that worked, is really proactively identify risks and opportunities of where the industry is going forward. Try and get on the front foot to make sure that we understand where the big picture trends are going. Secondly, to provide a basis for airlines and airports to have that discussion, to build on where they see they can go. So rather than everyone doing their study individually, we do a top-line one and then let them build on that. And thirdly, giving IATA and the industry a basis of discussion with the regulators and governments to have that conversation. But maybe, Alan, you could talk to the mechanics of how it went.
Sure. Good afternoon. So the purpose of doing a scenario study, I'm sure several of you, most of you are familiar with scenarios in one form or another. But the idea with any scenario study is to try and take an outsider look at what you're interested in. So in this case, the aviation industry. So instead of being in the kind of inside all of the industry pressures and looking outward, you actually try and position yourself looking at the context that the industry is situated in right now and looking at the forces, the factors, the drivers of change, as we call them, that are shaping the future context. So before you get down into the detail of what this means for the industry, think about what the world would be like insofar as it affects the industry. So you start to look at, you need to look at big forces, macroeconomic factors, geopolitical factors, climate change, which in the next 10, 20 years, of course, is going to have a huge impact one way or another. So to do that, to carry out this kind of study, you obviously do plenty of background research, but you also talk to people both inside and outside the industry who have ideas, views, intuitions about the way that certain things are going. So it's on the one hand quite a quantitative study, but also very much qualitative, looking for the kinds of people that have those insights. And then finally, with this material, through workshops, we carried out 2 workshops with a number of airline industry representatives. You bring people together into a room and you co-create, you construct together some scenarios. And that's quite a long, difficult process. But it's the one that we went through. And I believe that those scenarios showed some quite interesting trends that the airline industry needs to be paying attention to.
Did you predict Trump's election? Did you predict the Brexit?
I did that in another piece of work, actually. I'm not sure if that counts, but you don't predict an election result, but you predict things such as turning inwards. We did scenarios for the UK government in 2006 that saw the United States turning inwards, and basically America first. And that was about 10, 12 years ago. It was sort of happened within the scenario timeframe. You see these forces, you see the way that things move in cycles, and that's the big lesson, in fact, is just not to convince yourself at any point in time that the line that you're on is one that is going to continue in the same direction. And I think we're seeing a bit of an inflection point in a number of ways now anyway that sort of chimes with that, as you say.
So what do you predict? That's interesting now.
Well, there was a few key points that came out of this report and the analysis, and I'd like to just highlight on two of them. Firstly is that the centre of gravity is shifting. So if we were to mathematically calculate where all the flights are and the passengers are and basically reduce that down to a centre dot, in 1971 it was effectively halfway between New York and London, so across the Atlantic. And then currently now it's about over Turkey. And we expect it to be over India and moving east in the next 20 years. Now what that means is it's a theoretical mathematical number or location. However, it reflects the fact that the centre of the aviation world is moving east. And that has a really strong impact on the forces of regulation, on collaboration, and who has the front seat at the table. So it's really important that we're aware of that and we manage that accordingly. That's the first one. The second one is around infrastructure and capacity. That what we've got is, if we're expecting to double effectively in the next 20 years, we are running out of capacity both on the ground from an airport point of view and also in the air from an air capacity point of view. So we need to get smarter and faster on increasing capacity in those two spots. And we've got lots of numbers on that, but that's it. So they're the first two. The centre of gravity is shifting and the infrastructure is at capacity. And Alan?
A couple of other important things that came out of the study was, I mean, scenarios challenge the present, as I say, these kind of current trend lines that we're on. And in the two axes of our scenarios, we developed 4 scenarios altogether. The two of them, the way that they did that, the one axis was was around data, and these axes were chosen on the basis of the discussions at workshops and things and the analysis of drivers of change. And we were very surprised at the time, this is like 2.5 years ago now, that data came out on top. It would seem pretty obvious today, more so than then. But data, the question we asked, which I think is still a very valid one, is are we confident that data is moving in this generally accepted open way with open blockchains and open APIs and things like that, and open sharing of data internationally and within the industry as well. And so one of the axes imagined that would no longer be the case, and there are plenty of reasons why that may not be the case, whether they're commercial reasons, political reasons, etc. The other axis that we use to kind of question how sure we are about the direction we're going in at the moment is geopolitical turbulence. In other words, sort of calm on the one side of the axis and turbulence on the other. And I think the world, since we started the study, has actually sort of shifted a bit, become a bit more turbulent. But the question is, can it go further, and what are the impacts of that on the sector as well? We kind of assume we're moving in a kind of liberalizing, in all sorts of ways, consolidating world, and there's a not insignificant chance that, but there are already plenty of protectionist measures one way or another, but there is a chance that things would move more in this direction. So that just makes us ask the question, what is our strategy if things don't go in the way that we're assuming? And the interesting thing we'll maybe come on to is that for existing airlines and the existing airline structure of the industry, the full liberalization, open path may not be the most comfortable one anyway, and that gets back to the data.
So I just have to ask why liberalization is not such a good idea for the airlines.
Well, I think you've been talking about that a lot today already, indirectly and directly. The question is, are airlines now, and are they ever going to be the best users of data? Are they actually really going to be doing data, using it, making money out of it, anything like the way that the Googles, the Amazons, etc. are. I think, if you're setting up the airlines to go and take Google and Facebook head-on data, I just don't think that's a winning proposition. So the question then is, if you are moving in a liberalizing world and you're moving to open data, and you're taking your defenses down, as some airlines already are, from these organizations that have unlimited pockets, very deep pockets anyway, is that really in your best interest, or do you need to behave a little differently?
Which is good that we've got both of us up here, because I actually disagree with Alun on this one. I think it's really important that the airlines do two things. Firstly, own the data, and secondly, open it up in a structured, trustworthy way through an open API program or whatever mechanism it is. But it's really important to have an open ecosystem, and that's something we strongly believe at Iata, that having a structured open data mechanism between airlines and airports, ground handlers, and the passengers is really important to have an efficiency and effectiveness across this. Now, it's really important also to make sure that the right people own the right data and the GDPR is all in place. But it's really, we see a big strategic direction or strategic advantage for airlines and airports to have that collaboration, because in really simplistic terms, if a passenger is sitting inside an airport, their communication channel is with where they bought the ticket from, fundamentally, which is the airline. However, if something goes wrong in the baggage, it's the baggage handler, which is the ground handler. Now, he has to pass that information through there. I'm generalising a lot, but pass the information through there, from the ground handler to the airport, to the airline, to the passenger. Now, that simplistically convoluted way is a very difficult way to do it. So we need a mechanism that we can collaborate and share that information real time in a trusted, secure way to get that sort of efficiencies we're after. And
sorry, I should have been clear that I was talking about on the sort of commercial side of the data use, definitely not within and between within the airlines and between them. Apologies. And the other thing I should say, by the way, is that I am not Iata. I'm not speaking for Iata at all. We did the project, and I've subsequently used, as I hope other people will, because the publication is freely available and downloadable, the work to do other projects with. And I mean, it doesn't give answers, this study. It just asks you to think what you might do in certain situations, or how your organization might.
So the airlines who are members of the IATA have now this study.
Yes.
What should they do with it, or what are they already doing with it?
Well, I think there's multiple parts to that first question. Firstly, it's to understand the scenarios and understand what that means to them. But the takeouts from that, there's multiple, depending on where the airline is positioned or where the airport's positioned and strategically. But I think my number one recommendation is have a look at the data section, have a look at what that means to be an open data model, and how can they best share their data, operational and customer orientated, with the right parties and with the customer going forward. So sharing data is absolutely fundamental, I believe. IATA is doing an open API program at the moment where we're trying to get up on board airlines and airports sharing data through open APIs. We're working with ACI, Airport Council International, on that one as well. We did a study last July where there's 10 airlines that are currently running open API platforms on certain content. And we see another 60 who are running internal closed APIs with the intention of opening that up in the next 3 years. So we see a growth from 10 to 60 of open APIs, which is, again, API is application programming interface, it's not advanced passenger information. So it's a way of sharing data between systems. So we see 60 airlines are going to go into that place at the moment in the next 2 to 3 years. So that's really strategically very important for them and for the ecosystem. So that's my number one takeaway on that.
I would just say the number one is for airlines to make sure they play to their strengths and to really, in this world, which I think is becoming more difficult and challenging, there are certain characteristics that airlines have and that perhaps they don't see as valuable as they are. I think one of them is trust, reputation, brand to some extent, but particularly trust in terms of looking after customers' safety, security, looking after their data as well, compared to some other organizations. And also the link, which is often seen as a negative with governments and regulators, the fact that they are kind of regulated. Actually, in a way, this is a relationship which, where they can find good ways to work with the regulator. And indeed, one of the ways this report is being used is to sit down with regulators and government officials and say, well, look, this is how we see some of these things. What can we do together? How can airlines do better in this world? And I think that there are approaches then that don't involve commercially taking on some of these large companies which are already, and I think increasingly will be, interested in the airline business directly, but developing offers, and we heard some really great ideas already today. I mean, obviously this kind of building the full travel platform, full travel experience, door-to-door, building partnerships with other industries and sectors outside the airline industry and creating an offer which may have to exist in parallel to a kind of Uber-type airline proposition which will develop, but can be distinctive, maybe a bit more high-end, but there's probably room for that. So I would say definitely think about the strengths, and there'll be different strengths for different airlines as well, and different regions will demand different approaches, but think about what you're good at and work together as an industry.
Actually, also, we are, as Iata, doing various assistance and consulting, helping with airlines and airports to take this report to the next level for their use case as well. So that is an option as well.
What about questions from the audience? Yes, that's a good idea. It's in row number 3, seat number C.
Good afternoon. My name is Thierry Gnich. I'm from IBM, and I found quite interesting what you were discussing, because we feel that today in the industry, data has been the new natural energy, I would say, and we feel that data is essential. What is a bit surprising is that you say there may be some resistance when we see that the airline industry has actually been making nice benefits and profits in the last few years. Wouldn't they take advantage of, based on your experience of this, to actually try to make a leap forward, and try maybe to respond more to customers' expectations?
Yeah, I think it's very much around it's not a technical question around how do we share data, it's more of a cultural change. If you go to the Silicon Valley or a startup or a tech company, they natively straight into open APIs, sharing data, sharing between systems. Whereas if you go to a legacy, or, a traditional airline, that mindset's not there. So it's really trying to force the mindset to start about sharing data and not worry about the commercial model up front, because many conversations we have is, yeah, but how am I going to make money out of it? What's the commercial model? Get the concept in place, and then let the commercials come out from that point. But it's really, it's not so much a technical constraint, because the technology's out there. It's relatively simple. It's just invest and put it in place. It's around the business model, or it's the opportunities around that.
Thank you very much. One more question, or 2 more questions, and then my last question, please.
Michael Quinn, Branch Space. Just curious whether the report looked into the impact of alternatives to airlines and flights, such as the high-speed rail network and how that's evolving, and also more disruptive technologies like Hyperloop.
Yes, both specifically were looked at, and indeed considered very, very important. The whole kind of multimodal development in multimodal transport, I think, will be very important. And Hyperloop, there's a lot of uncertainty around it, but that would certainly be a big disruptor for airlines initially over some routes, but potentially quite widely. So this was looked at, and from IATA's point of view, there was even a recommendation, I think, for IATA to think about, to consider opening discussions with non-airlines precisely to consider these types of things. So I think there's a lot of open questions there, but the interconnection, even to the extent of a kind of Uber-like integration, and this is not directly in the report, it comes from sort of a study for another client afterwards, but the integration of sort of an air link within a sort of Uber type journey that is you're given, I think is an interesting thing to consider on the one side, but on the other side is more of a proactive formation of partnerships, as I was saying before, between airlines and other transport providers.
Thank you very much. And last question from, well, if we just turn around, it's first class.
Yeah. Good evening. My name is Peter from AVIATION. I have a question to Tim. When you said that also in the airline, in your clientele, your members, there's still a kind of hesitation into entering such API sharing and open data. Is there a way to characterize let's say, the drivers and the ones who are, let's say, more hesitant? Is there a certain group of airlines that's promoting this kind of approach, and is it somehow regional or somehow other way to be characterized?
I think I could answer the question in the reverse and saying which airlines do I see that are taking the step forward quicker is the ones where they've got strong technology leadership from a strategic point of view. So certain CIOs who have come from a technology company or from another industry, they're the ones that are driving the program. So it's not an operational or a business as usual or a tactical thing. It's a strategic play, and it's coming from people from the leadership, the people who get it, who understand that it's an essential. They're the guys that are driving it, and ladies.
Like KLM?
Correct. KLM. Well, I'm not going to start naming names because then that would be...
Yeah. No names, but KLM was right, yeah. I like that one, and we'll tell everybody in the Netherlands. My final question, and it just needs a short answer. We are, especially in Europe, living in rich times, but also in turbulent times. What is your number one advice? Each has one advice for the aviation industry.
In relation to this report, it is certainly look at the open data model and see how you can start down that path and start to get gains from that, because it's essential.
It's hard to boil that down to one, or rather one that I haven't used already. I would just say again, I just do think there is a kind of commoditization route for the airlines, which is, I think, very easy to imagine. You don't know over what time frame, I'm not sure. And I think just be quite careful about some types of partnerships that may look sensible right now. Just think ahead to the logical conclusion of some of those in terms of just retaining control over your business and over the way that it works. That's links back to the question that we were answering here,
so,
I guess.
And we'll also, I think, put the report onto the Slack community as well.
Wonderful.
Yeah, we'll put it on the Slack. I'll put it on the Slack site straight afterwards if you want to take a look.
So let's Slack together. Thank you very much for being here, Tim and Alan. And see you tonight for the dinner, I hope.